When Christ warns us about the suffering of hell, we know we need to take notice of what he's saying. And this is exactly what he does in the 16th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Luke. Here he tells us a parable of a rich man and the poor man Lazarus, who both die, and the wealthy man experiences the torments of hell. And in the parable, the man in hell cries out and begs to be allowed to return to earth to warn his brothers. And he's informed, you cannot return, and what good would it be if they can't hear the prophets, the messengers that God has sent? Why would they listen to you? The man is prevented from returning to earth to warn those he loves. And yet here in this parable, we hear his warning. Christ permits this warning that the rich man would love to share with his brothers to reach our ears. Will we hear it? Will we listen to this warning that comes from hell? The two men die, we're told, both rich and poor. One, the poor man Lazarus, is carried to the bosom of Abraham. And yet the rich man, he experiences terrible torments in hell. And in the parable, Jesus doesn't tell us that he murdered, that he lied, that he was a glutton, that he lacked faith. So why then did the man go to hell? He went there because he failed to see Lazarus, the poor man, at his gate. He failed to care for him. His heart was so consumed with himself, with his own pleasures, with his own possessions, that he couldn't feel anything for the suffering of the man immediately at his door. To fail to see those who suffer. It is the same message that Jesus gives us in the parable of the sheep and the goats. Those who are cast away into darkness, what was their crime? Does Jesus say in that parable that they stole, that they killed? No, that they failed to feed the hungry, that they failed to care for those in need. It is this failure to have compassion, this failure to show mercy, that brings condemnation on the hard of heart. St. Simeon, the new theologian, says to us, even if we were to feed and clothe the hungry and the naked of the whole world, and yet walk by and ignore one person, then God will judge us as having ignored Christ, who is hungry and homeless. Now, of course, in reality, if we live in a major city, we will encounter homeless people all the time, particularly in parts of Los Angeles and London and places like this. And when we see images and hear of starvation and terrible disasters around the world, we can give what we can, but we can't solve huge international problems. We can't solve the homelessness problem by ourselves. We can do what we can. So what is the practical application of this teaching then? Well, of course, it is the condition of our heart. We are to care, we are to see, we are to notice those in need. We are to give what we can, but also we are to hold them in prayer. The world will laugh at this. The world will say, well, what good is this? What does prayer achieve? Won't they continue to go hungry? And yet, if we show compassion, if our hearts are full of mercy for these people, then the prayer that we offer to God will be a great blessing on them. In the parable, of course, it is Lazarus who is named. Lazarus and the rich man. The rich man is not named. Christ turns the values of the world upside down. When we see things on the media, it is the powerful, the rich, those of high status, whose names are recorded when they die, and the incidents and the actions that they perform in the world. The poor, the worthless to this world, go unnamed. And yet here, it is the name of Lazarus that is remembered by God in the parable. And scholars have argued why else would Jesus then have given this character, because this is the only parable that Jesus names one of his characters in his story. But the fathers tell us that by doing this, Jesus brings this need of concern and care to our very doorstep. It gives it an immediacy. It no longer is a hypothetical, a theoretical kind of caring that God calls us to. God calls us to care for those who are immediately with us, our neighbours, our work colleagues, our family members, our mothers, our fathers, sisters, brothers. The people that God has placed directly in our lives. He calls us to care for. He calls us to show mercy to. He calls us to soften our hearts and allow compassion to be there for those around us. Even those that sometimes we will judge, sometimes we may even desire to condemn. We may say to ourselves, oh, well, their actions have led to this. They're poor because of their wrong decisions. This is not what Christ calls us to. He calls us to compassion. He says to us, as the Jews said, we are the children of Abraham, Jesus says, no, we can call up children of Abraham at any time. If you wish to be the children of Abraham, he says, then do the things of Abraham. It is through our actions that we identify ourselves as the children of God. And we wish to imitate Christ. What did Christ do? For us, for our salvation, Christ impoverished himself. Christ left the glories of heaven, the riches, the treasures, the eternal treasures of heaven, and impoverishes himself to be born in a stable, to be incarnate in our flesh, the mortality of our lives. He enters into this poverty for us. So we too must be willing to give what we can, not to hold on to those things that are rightly to be shared. There's another difficult saying from St. Simeon the theologian. He says, if I see my neighbour is poor, then the riches I have stolen. I must share. I must share all that God has given me, because the bounty of this world is God's. We do not truly possess anything, and when we die, we take nothing with us. We must relinquish everything, so that when we die, it will not be anything that we are foregoing. We are not losing anything of this world. Our death will not take anything of value from us. That must be the condition of our heart. We are called to show compassion. This is the very basic, straightforward message of this parable. We must care. In the parable we're told that both men die, but the words, the rich man was buried. It's a reminder to us that even before he died, the rich man had buried himself in the physical, material things of this world. He was already buried, even though his body was alive. We must not be buried, weighed down by the things of this world, by the things we would collect. St. Theophan, the recluse, says to us, if we recognize that everything is temporal, everything passes, then why do we waste our time trying to possess that which is temporal? Why do we waste our time collecting for ourselves those things that will pass away like sand through our fingers? None of this can we hold on to. So let us share, let us show compassion, let us be merciful, even as God has been merciful to us.